I was a swimmer and a diver growing up, and my dad would always drive me for 6 a.m. practices. And he was a tight end, collegiate college, large university, and he always told me, "You can do hard." And so when I be running and I be timing myself or I be in races, I would always remember I can do hard. And it's not necessarily pretty, doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect, but I can do hard.
Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. With me for today's episode is Sarah Jensen, whose journey has taken her from competitive swimming and diving to the boardrooms of nonprofit organizations and leadership circles like YPO. But it's her personal story, navigating more than a decade of unexplained infertility, that ultimately led her to found the mission-driven wellness company Hue and Grace in 2019. Sarah brings the same discipline, focus, and resilience from her athletic background into her leadership today. Now make sure to check out corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes for my favorite quotes and reflection questions to help you apply today's insights. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
It's great to see you again.
I know it was. I want to share with our listeners that you and I met at a really fascinating event, Real Leaders Magazine, where we're both big fans. Hosted an event out in Southern California where they were bringing thought leaders together to talk about different aspects of their journey. And I had the chance to speak to folks about the art of storytelling, but you came up afterward and shared part of your story with me, and I was riveted because what you did with your situation is just magical. But let's start with the idea that your company grew out of something very deeply personal. You shared that, and you shared openly. You shared your journey of navigating 14 years of unexplained infertility. How how is that ability to be so vulnerable about something so personal, something that most other people might not open up about? How's that opened doors for you and even shaped your leadership?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because for the first 10 years of our infertility struggle, we didn't tell anybody. Not family, not friends, not colleagues. And it's interesting because my husband, we're both the oldest of 6 kids. We come from very large families. And my mother-in-law got remarried, and we were on a hike with my new stepsister-in-law. And she asked, she goes, "Do you guys want kids?" And I felt because she wasn't like didn't know her very as well as anybody. And I didn't I just shared with her and I said, "We've been trying for 10 years and we're looking at adoption, we're looking at options." And it was then when she said, "I'm family, I'll be your surrogate." And I actually didn't think she was serious, so I didn't even tell my husband about it. But it was that life lesson. Had I never shared, I would have never had my children. And it took my sister-in-law 3 attempts to get pregnant. It was a very long process, but I didn't even tell my family we were expecting until Jenna, my sister-in-law, was in her second trimester. And then my sister, who I was the closest with growing up, said, "How come you never asked me?" And I said, "I could never ask anybody to be a surrogate." It's it impacts your whole family, but then she volunteered to be our second surrogate. And so it was really that life lesson of had I not ever shared. Then it was also really interesting because because we were so private about our infertility struggle, when we were finally telling our friends and work colleagues that we were expecting, but it was my sister-in-law or sister carrying, people came and shared with us their struggles.
How has that manifested itself in your relationship with all those that you get a chance to impact today?
It's I think that's actually really helped our business grow fast. I Consumers and people in general want authenticity. They wanna feel connected to a mission. They wanna be connected to something that's larger than themselves, that they feel like where they can see themselves and invest their time and energy into. People love that, Hue and Grace exists. That it's not just another brand that's trying to make money, but that there's real purpose and, we offer education and content and live events, that they can be there. But they also see that Ben and I are real people. and we make mistakes, and we always try to do better. But we didn't come from a consumer background. I was in philanthropy, and my husband operated, a family office, and we never expected that we'd be doing this with our lives. And so I think when people also realize that we're not pretending to be the experts in, a certain area, they come in, they want to help. And it's that saying, who can I introduce you to, or what can we do together? How can we collaborate? And that's been really amazing.
I would guess that there's just a massive business lesson in that too, right? I mean, obviously it was very personal for you, but this idea that, as you said, people want authenticity, they want to feel like they're part of something, they want to connect. Um, we as leaders sometimes struggle, right? We struggle with that idea of, boy, should we let people know that we're up against it too, right? It's because it doesn't feel natural, and it feels like people come to us for solutions. They don't come to hear that we have problems. But that's not necessarily true.
No. And we have a lot of listening sessions. And so built in, we're multi-channel with our business, but one of our channels is direct sales. And we have 2 calls every single month with our top performers, different groups, and listen and say, what can we do better? What's working? What's not working? Do you have suggestions for us? We just changed to a whole new tech platform, and we have an email that's called Solutions at Hue and Grace. So when people find issues, and there's always issues, but if they have ideas or suggestions, they put the email in, and we try to implement when we can these changes, because we do not know it all. That's for sure.
Wow, I love it. I look at what you all have done. I think about the very personal nature of it, but I think often about how the rest of us can learn from you, and I think that's a great opening salvo. You shared in a podcast that you recently did that a mentor once told you, quote, "You're most qualified to serve the person you once were." We talk often in our environment, in our business, about serving the 1.0 version of yourself, right? We talk about writing books for the 1.0 version of yourself, or creating content for those folks. What advice would you give to leaders in other industries about applying that idea?
So it's interesting. I actually did not like the 1.0 version of myself. I mean, it was interesting because I was in
That's
sport.
probably true of a lot of people, I would bet.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I didn't have I didn't ever have, I mean, I think outside looking in, I should have had a lot of self-confidence. I was in sports. I did, I modeled, I did a bunch of things that I thought would bring me self-confidence, but I didn't like myself. I didn't have self-confidence. And in growing this business, and with, I love the story. We do incentive trips with our business. And I'd met this lady, lovely housewife, and from Florida. And she was a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids. And she decided she wanted to come partner with us. And she earned a spot on our incentive trip for her and her husband. And her husband came up to us, and he said, "I'm in sales, and I've taken my wife all over the world on president's trips." And he goes, "I've never been more proud to be here as her guest." And he goes, "The leadership that she's accomplished, the self-confidence, she's my daughter, she's a better mother, she's a better spouse, she's more involved in the community." And so to serve that, and to create confidence and help share confidence for other people. When people achieve things they didn't believe they could achieve, they get confident, and they become a better version of themselves, and they strive for more.
That's awesome. You mentioned sports, and there's a tie in this podcast to the idea that people like you, guests who have been very successful in their business lives, also have a little athletic touch in what it is it's helped make them so focused and great. You're a Boston Marathon qualifier, pretty cool, and an ultra marathoner. That achievements that require more mental strength than most people can imagine. Um, can you share a specific moment from your running journey that challenged your limits, and that now influences a little bit about how you lead when your team is under pressure?
Yes. So I actually qualified for Boston the year of the bombing.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was interesting because so I qualified in March and then
2016, right?
yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. So I qualified in March. I told everyone I qualified for Boston, but you qualify for the following year. But
Right.
then April hit and the bombing happened. And I was in
Right.
a work meeting for a private club for 3 hours where you can't look at your phone. I walked out and I had 500 missed calls and people were so worried that I was there. But then for the following year, they actually let the people who had passed halfway but not completed in. So then I actually had to requalify. But having that grit and I think in business there are so many things that come your way, and by knowing the end goal, saying that this is what I want and I will do anything in my power to get there has been, I think, key for being successful.
Pull that into your development of the company, right? And how you're doing. I mean, there got to be days when grit is all you can lean into because everything else seems to probably have fallen aside.
Well, it's really interesting. So my husband and I decided to try to launch our business. We were supposed to launch in May of 2020, and that COVID hit. So we actually launched May of 21.
Wow, you get a bombing and COVID, both two major moments in your life. That's crazy.
We did, and we were fundraising, and there right before we launched, we had a fund that wanted to write us a 7-figure check, but it did not feel authentic. The way they wanted to grow our brand didn't feel, and working with my spouse and having a newborn and a barely 2-year-old, and we really could have used that 7-figure check, and turning it down was incredibly difficult.
Entrepreneurship is much like an ultra marathon, right? It is the idea of stepping out, going to do. I know you've spent some time in YPO. You've got lots of YPO friends. What parallels exist between preparing for a race and navigating the marathon that is entrepreneurship?
Oh my gosh, I wish running a business was easy as a marathon. planning
Wow.
for
I
planning for a
wish
marathon.
running a business was as easy as running a marathon. Wow, that's crazy. You know, research shows that 80% of us believe we have a book within us, but the number of people who follow through and do the work to create that book is far, far less. The reason is that the process can seem so overwhelming. And that is why I have partnered with Forbes Books to make the process easier for those of you who listen to this podcast and believe you have a story in you. So if you're ready to turn your leadership experience into your legacy, start your journey with us today at Forbes Books. Visit forbesbooks.com/Don to get started.
No, but running a marathon, there's playbooks, and
Right.
you know the number of miles you need to run a week. There's schedules, and then for us, because I have my MBA, my husband has 2 masters, but we didn't go to school to learn how to, to create a consumer business, and so we had to create this whole new category. And then knowing that people didn't realize the impact hormone disruption had on their health, we had to create education and content and community with products because that's really the holistic solution. And it's saying, okay, how do we modernize direct sales? How do we make this multi-channel? How do we make this feel authentic and real and approachable? And and so we were so honored, but it wasn't just a recognition for us because we have over 10,000 people in just 4 years who are also helping us share this mission. And so it was so cool to be there to receive the award, but it's not just about me and Ben. It was really for our community we say we're real people making real impact because our advocates are in their communities sharing with their kids, with their friends, with their families authentically. Because it's interesting, some people hear our story and they think of infertility, but other people think about mental illness or about cancers or, there's so many issues tied to hormone disruption. And so to really feel like the fact that we won that award, and we also won the fastest growing impact award, which is also just incredible. But it's us representing a lot of people who are doing amazing work.
Wow, I love it. I want to go back to one more question about running because I'm just so fascinated, and I know what it takes to prep for those races. What lessons from pushing through the physical and the mental limits that during training have influenced how you make business decisions?
So my dad always, I was a swimmer and a diver growing up, and my dad would always drive me up for 6 a.m. practices. And he was a tight end collegiate college, large university, and he always told me, "You can do hard." And so when I be running and when I be timing myself or I be in races, I would always remember I can do hard. And it's not necessarily pretty, doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect, but I can do hard. And so in business, and when I talk to others, I know it's being having the grit, I knowing I can do hard, but also surrounding myself with incredible people who believe in me, believe in themselves, and that also gives confidence that when I know that my body strength, my mental strength is there, but when I have the collection of all these people who believe and value the same things, that's when we're able to win awards like that.
Yeah. I have to ask, I know one of the last times you and I were talking, you were actually on your way to, the Middle East, to speak to government leaders of countries that, not very long ago, they weren't inviting women to do anything, and you're coming in to talk about hormone health.
We all have life experiences that teach us things. And either I could have gone through it, learned all about hormone health, which I did during our unexplained infertility, and just kept to myself, and not create a business, not just. And it's funny. We had our kids, and after having Grace, I just couldn't sleep. I kept telling Ben, we have to start a business, and we have to do this. And he's like, no, we have to. Let's enjoy our kids. And finally, he said, yes, we need to do this because we have the talent, we have the relationships, we have the capacity, we have the resources where we can do this. And I think with our life experiences, we can either choose to leverage them to help others or not.
One of the things about athletics is that one of the most important things you have to do is show up, right? You got to be there, and you got to be there for practice. You got to be there for moments that you don't want to be there for. That's a lot like being a CEO, right? It's a lot like being an executive. Uh, what did those experiences in the pool teach you that have made you a better leader?
The 6 a.m. diving practices and swimming, yes, it in cold water and during the winter was not fun. But it is showing up every day. It is knowing that your team counts on you, and if you don't show up, that they're not their best. Um, this business isn't about me and Ben. It's about, it is about us, but it's mostly about other people, and knowing that, I mean, we all have our bad days, but being there and just the repetitiveness of knowing that you have to work hard and show up and smile and be there for the team, even if you don't want to, and be physically uncomfortable, but it also makes you stronger.
Yeah, what makes you uncomfortable makes you stronger. That's true. You know, I read where you've openly shared your admiration for Brownie Wise, the leader who turned Tupperware into a household
She
name.
helped, yes.
Yeah, and you actually dug deep into her Harvard business case study that was done about her. What lessons from her leadership inspired yours?
Yeah, so that was our favorite Harvard business case study, graduate school. And so she knew Mr. Tupper. She is interesting. She actually started buying his products and then started selling it door to door. And but he didn't have a way to platform to sell his business. And she created the Tupperware Party. And this is back in the 50s when women were not working outside the home. They were not earning income. And she created this whole platform where women were able to go and earn money and help their families. And I remember watching this black and white video of her at a conference, recognizing women on stage and seeing these women cry And I actually went home to bed that night. I'm like, this lady created this most amazing plate. She changed the world. She look at all these people that she was helping impact. This is, 40 years, a long time ago, 50 years ago. And so I actually flew to her museum in Orlando after graduating, went through her museum. But it was a life lesson where Mr. Tupper didn't ask her to do that. She genuinely loved this product. She wanted to have other people share and learn and then create a fun way to create a party and to have people have better lives, have more income. And so that was really, we were trying to decide how to go to market for our business. First of all, my husband was sitting on a board of directors for a D2C company. He's like, we don't want our business solely reliant on an algorithm that we cannot control, but also realizing that this was so much more of a conversation. We needed to create awareness and education and content. That word of mouth and direct sales would need to be one of those channels. And saying, okay, what can I learn from Brownie? I think she was the very first woman ever featured on the front of like an entrepreneurship magazine. I mean,
Wow.
really interesting. That Brownie Wise inspiration was everyone, not everyone maybe, but wants to have a mentor. You want to see somebody who's done something and say, oh, I can accomplish, if she accomplished that, or if they've accomplished that, I can accomplish it as well.
Yeah. I want to ask a mentor question, but I want to go ahead and we just might as well note that you may be the first person that's ever gone to Orlando to see a Tupperware museum. Most people go to Orlando for the mouse or they go for Universal Studios.
Yes.
They don't go for the Tupperware museum, but that's cool. That's good.
Yeah.
But what I love, and mentorship's a big issue for me and for our listeners. We talk a lot about it. I love the story because it's a reminder that mentors don't have to be people you've met, right? Just visiting your museum, studying her journey, taught you so much. And for someone who's listening and still searching for guidance, how can they find mentorship in unexpected places? Any advice you'd give them?
I think when looking for a mentor, it's really defining what your version of success is, what makes you happy. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks. And then find someone who's doing that and reach out on LinkedIn, on whatever. But people are so open and receptive to everyone wants to know like, wow, you think it could be a great mentor for you? What a compliment. And so it's also being proactive to figure that out, figure out who's living the dream life for you, and then contact them or even model and read about them and say
Sometimes you don't actually. I mean, the thing I love about the Brownie Wise story is that you didn't actually ever meet her, right? You got a chance to learn from somebody you didn't meet. Sorry, you've said your goal isn't to just put a product on a shelf. You want to actually create awareness, right? Through knowledge, through community, through products. For someone who's listening, someone who is on this podcast right now, listening, who maybe wants to build something meaningful, but what advice would you have for them on shifting from a product mindset, like I'm going to go create a product, to a purpose mindset?
Well, I can tell you, creating products are actually really difficult. There's a lot of capital, a lot of time, supply chain issues. There's a lot of stuff there. And so figuring out what your mission is and maybe if you want to think about a product, think about what that is actually solving. What need is that solving? And how will that make you feel? Are you wanting to create a business or create a product to help you feel a different way? Okay, what else will help you feel that way? Is it serving others? Is it finding a need that other people aren't seeing and then figuring out how can you create maybe awareness or education around that and partnering with somebody who's already maybe manufacturing the product. And so you don't have to outlay the capital and the headaches with 3PLs and all the logistics, but finding that purpose and finding people around that topic, and then starting with the end in mind, starting with the real problem you want to solve, and then work backwards.
Yeah, and then ultimately, you may find the product that becomes part of that solution, but the solution doesn't have to be a product, right?
No, but it's when you're on the ground and in a room with people, and when their eyes glaze over, or when they lean in, and you learn that people talk about hormones differently in Ohio than they do in New York, and you learn the products they want, and we completely changed our messaging where we, instead of talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, we talk about simple swaps.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Last question. The mindset of learning from others is around you clearly carried over from your athletic days. Obviously, you're talking about, teammates, coaches, others. Um, but through your work with YPO,
Mhm.
YPO is I so love what YPO is. I love meeting people who are invested in it. You surround yourself with other high level leaders. What patterns have you noticed in the way great leaders show up? Like the importance of showing. Remember we talked about showing up earlier, but how
Yep.
do they show up for their companies, their families? How do the great leaders show up?
I think a lot of them show up with humility. I think the one thing that's really great with YPO is the forums, and where um, it was really cool. I actually helped start the spousal forum in Malibu, our chapter in Malibu. But it's in the forum aspects. You never give advice. You listen. You share experiences that emotional experiences. But it's by never giving advice, you're not putting yourself above anybody else. And so I think that lesson of we're all here collectively going through really great times, really hard times, and then bringing those lessons to your company where you do have to lead, you do make decisions, but you have a sensitivity to that there may be a lot of other things in your employees' lives that you may not know about. And so making sure that they have the infrastructure, they have the support they need, but also realizing that it, to be kind, humble, and it's servant leader. I mean, I see a lot of servant leadership.
Yeah, no question. Sarah, I'm so grateful. Kevin Edwards brought us together, right? I love it.
Yeah.
Our mutual friend at Real Leaders. Today, I got a chance to learn from you, and I appreciate you being a corporate competitor with us today.
Don, you're amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad I got a chance to meet Sarah at that Real Leaders event. I'm so glad that I got to learn her story, and that today we got a chance to share it with you. I took three really important lessons from it. The first was it's just that importance of authenticity, like that whole discussion about how she's right. People want to work with people who are open, who they feel like they can relate to, who are willing to kind of lay a little bit of the challenging moments of their life out there to be discussed. And as difficult as their situation was, um, Sarah has learned to be vulnerable about it, and that willingness has opened up a door for her to influence many other people, and obviously even build a company. My second one was I love the conversation with her dad, right? Her dad taking her to those swimming and diving practices and saying, "You can do hard," and the mindset that created for her, which ultimately led her to realize that sometimes in life you have to go through things for a reason. That's difficult because human nature is we wanna say, "Boy, we went through that, but I don't wanna ever go through it again." Sometimes putting it in a different frame allows you to contextualize those challenges, find purpose in them, and I challenge you to do the same because I'm sure many of us are going through moments that we need to realize, we're going through this moment for a reason. Lastly, on the idea of mentorship and the Tupperware example. I love that idea that sometimes mentorship can come to you. Brownie Wise became influential to her, and she never met her because mentorship doesn't have to be a one-on-one situation. Sometimes it can come to you in unexpected places. You don't have to meet the person to be mentored by them. So I took great lessons from today. I hope you did as well. I appreciate you. I don't even have to open the door for you to make fun of me.